Hey, everybody. Welcome to the first episode of the Fulfillment Mindset podcast. My name is Josh, and really wanted to start this podcast just to kind of get out there and see, right? Talking with a lot of coaching clients and different people and stuff on a daily basis, going through problems and different ways, to handle situations, and just talking with people about a lot of general life things. So going through that, right? Talking with everybody, a big part of what that came out to be is a lot of people like talking about what it is that means to find fulfillment in life. And I originally started this by looking at what is it that brings happiness? Just kind of toying around with names and stuff. We were looking at some sort of like happiness or success or some sort of abundance mindset kind of type podcast. But I think the biggest thing that I noticed is even with, talking with some of my friends, right, they say finance, doesn't necessarily bring happiness, or finding the love of your life doesn't necessarily bring happiness, making a bunch of money or having the wealthiest job or having all the stuff or different things like that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be happy in life. And so kind of continue to toy around with the ideas of what it meant to actually be fulfilled in life, or what it actually meant to find happiness, and kind of came down to not necessarily success, but more or less just general fulfillment in life. And when you can achieve what it is that makes your heart fulfilled, what fulfills your mind and your goals and your drives and everything you're trying to do in life, when you're in a good spot and you find that, it's more of a fulfillment. So that's kind of where the name Fulfillment Mindset came from. Just wanted to make the podcast generally based around that. And what does it mean? So when we look at how you can achieve fulfillment, I think there's three basic ways, and we can always dive into this. I'm sure there'll be a plethora of episodes. Maybe one of the episodes will make talking about these different three things. But there's life, your relationships, and your financial side. So finding fulfillment in those three things, those are kind of like just the basics, I'd say, of what you would cover, the three foundational pillars to what it means to find fulfillment. So today, what I wanted to do, being the first episode and all, I wanted to get out there and explain a little bit about who I am, where I've come from, what I've done, where I've been, and how that all really relates to like where I'm at today, and all the steps and everything that have happened in my life to get me to the point to where I am today. And I think I've gone through some pretty emotional highs and emotional lows, gone through quite a bit of stuff, and I bring a lot of relevance to the table. And all through my entire life, really getting me to the point to where I am today, I think I've got a lot of lessons and things and valuable things that I can share with other people. A lot of things that bring people strife and struggle is on the relationship side, right? We always think about finances and how that's hard, and we're always trying to achieve and do better. But the other side of the financial piece is the relationship piece. And if you realize some moments in life, especially if you're younger, or even if you're older, it happens at any age really. But think about what are the times that you've been the happiest and what are the times that you've been the saddest. And it's probably somehow dives into some sort of relationship at some point. So definitely on the financial side, the relationship side is huge. And I have definitely gone through quite a few different things on the relationship stuff. And that's something that I wanted to talk about today as we kind of go through the story. And then obviously share a little bit just about my backstory and how I've kind of taken the path and where that relevance lies. So without further ado, let's get right into it. All right. So to kick things off, again, my name is Josh. Kind of grew up from just a really kind of basic and average middle-class family. I had 3 younger sisters. I was the oldest of 4. And then my mother and father. I grew up with a Catholic background, born and raised just a simple small town. We moved around quite a bit, but then more or less grew up in a tiny town in Michigan. I ended up going to Michigan State University and graduated there with a 4-year degree. Following that, I was in the ROTC program while I was at Michigan State. And upon graduation, I commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Army, and then immediately more or less had a job and started doing a significant amount of training. So right after graduating from Michigan State, went straight down to Georgia. And then from there at Georgia, I started doing all the training and stuff that I did. I think I was there for about a year and a half or so. And then started doing all the different schooling. Once all that was done, I had found out what unit I was going to, and the unit that I was going to demanded the high caliber people have a little bit additional training, if you will. So there's a school called Army Ranger School, and I ended up going to that. And I ended up graduating. It's kind of like a survival school. It's like the military's top tier. It's the Army's top, like 1% of people go to the school and pass and come out of that. And it does a little bit of survival. It kind of teaches you how to break down your mind and how to build it back up and, not give up and continue to persevere and look out for your buddies, right? And never leave anybody behind and pretty much learn how to mentally push yourself further than you've ever pushed yourself before. So if I ever had to look at something physically that I've done, I'd say that's probably one of the hardest things I've done. There's definitely a mental struggle that goes into that, but it is by far one of the most physically uncomfortable times in my life that I've literally ever been. I think there was one time where I actually remember, I always tell everybody, it was like the worst day of my life was the day that I woke up on the side of a mountain. It was raining. It was raining, mind you, in January. And the rain was so cold that it was forming ice over my sleeping bag. Of course, you're sleeping outside, right? So it's just you, the sleeping bag, and then the weather. And there's ice forming around the outside. And I was sleeping on a slope in snow and woke up to what they do to kind of get you guys moving and stuff in the morning is the instructors will throw these artillery simulators, RD-sims they call them, and just sounds like kind of like incoming artillery, more or less. So like you're getting bombarded. And they throw those, and that pretty much means you got to get up and move because someone's watching you. So they're calling in artillery on you. So you got to get up and you got to go. So that's their way of waking you up in the morning. I remember that started going off. I was in my sleeping bag. It was actually nice and comfortable for once, believe it or not, as cold as it was. And that started going off. And I remember just sitting there as it's raining, getting out of my sleeping bag, nice warm sleeping bag, into the raining cold. And I was kneeling in the snow. And of course, you kind of keep everything packed. So I had my weapon there. I had my big rucksack there. And then I had my sleeping bag kind of laid out. So more or less, as the simulators were going off, got out of a sleeping bag and started just stuffing it in my rucksack, not even rolling it or nothing like that. It was just soaking wet. And I was just stuffing that thing in my ruck. And I remember just sitting there with the most blank and numb expression on my face as my hands were purple. It's just mindlessly stuffing this thing. I mean, you're half asleep still at this point, if you think about it, but mindlessly stuffing this thing in my sleeping bag and just kind of being completely zoned out. And I tell everybody, I'm like, that was the worst day of my life. Just getting pissed on by the rain, freezing cold weather, artillery sims going off, just everything, just completely numb to it. But I ended up getting through that whole thing, graduated, and then my first duty station after Georgia was then North Carolina. I was in an airborne unit called the 82nd Airborne, jumped out of airplanes and stuff for a hot minute there. I deployed for the first time out of Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Deployed, did one rotation overseas, and then came back. And then after that, ended up going back to Georgia for the next round of schooling. So after about 3 years in North Carolina, I went back to Georgia for about a year. And then after 9 months to a year or so in Georgia, I ended up going to my second duty station, and that was Fort Carson, Colorado. So I ended up going there, and that was my second duty station. I ended up deploying a second time out of Fort Carson while I was in command. So that's one of the things you have to do as an officer. Each duty position has a different role you have to achieve while you're in that in order to get graded and kind of like evaluated, if you will. So I ended up taking command in Fort Carson, deployed out of there, and then following deployment, I kind of always told myself I wanted to be a captain, wanted to do command, and at that point, I wanted to decide what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, right? So I wanted to see if I was going to stay in or if I was going to get out. So it's kind of like just a career decision point that I always set for myself. So put me around the 6-year mark, 6.5 years. But after that, then I ended up having a few job offers on the table. And I took one with Northwestern Mutual. I ended up meeting some really cool people and was offered a position with them as a financial advisor. So I had that kind of lined up all prior to the deployment, during the deployment, and then after the deployment came back and ended up working with them. So did that. And then after just under a year, I'd say about 9 months or so, kind of had gone through this just general, I'm not gonna say spiritual awakening, but it kind of feels like that, right? It feels like I definitely went through a major growth point in my life and had a lot of decisions to make and a lot of really important things to think about and to look over. And ended up kind of more or less starting a few different revenue streams and created enough passive income and everything to kind of get me to where I am today. That's more or less what brings me to desiring to make a podcast. I think I've gone through a lot of stuff. I think I've learned a lot of stuff. And I would like to pass that along to anybody else that's obviously willing to listen and willing to improve and desiring, to make their life better. There's a quote I like to say, and it's the funny thing about the 1% is they want to teach everybody they can to get to where they are. The weird thing is 99% of the people they talk to won't take their advice. So I'm here hopefully to provide a little bit of relevance. I'm not saying I am the 1%, but I know I'm going to be there and it's going to happen. So I set some pretty ambitious goals for myself, and I've ended up achieving them. And then, I just set the next ones and the next ones and the next ones. But I know I'm going to be there, so I'd like to share my journey and kind of help everybody else I can get to that same point, right? If you're willing to take my advice and listen to what I have to do, I think I've got some valuable stuff that can really help you out. So it's kind of a little bit of background about how my professional life was. Now, the next piece I'm going to talk about, I'm going to kind of dive into what was my relationship stuff like, because I think what drove a lot of my business success, which is the last thing I'll talk about today, was some of the relationship struggles. Because I've always, ever since being a kid, right, I've always kind of grown up and known that, I want a family. I want somebody that's, unique and special and different. And I think everybody's in the same boat. I think I learned a lot in terms of what it means to settle in relationships and how that can affect things. And it changes a lot, but you learn a lot, right? At the same time, you learn a lot. And when you find somebody that makes you happy, the potential of heartbreak is extreme. But at the same time, I think the amount of pain you experience also determines the amount of growth that you experience too. So more pain that happens in your life due to an event or a cause or a loss or whatever it is, that's the equivalent of how much growth is on the backside of that pain if you were to stick it out and continue to push forward. So when I was in college, I ended up dating a girl that I met on spring break one year. And I remember I ended up talking with her a little bit, and then it was like junior year of college or something. We ended up starting to date. And we dated throughout the end of college. And then when I ended up going to Georgia right after graduation for my first round of schooling and stuff, she didn't come with me. Obviously, she had her own things going on and all that stuff. So she stayed back in Michigan, and I went to Georgia by myself, and she was just coming down and visit. Well, after Ranger School, that does some funny things to you when you survive all that kind of craziness. So I was like, you know what? Forget it. I hate being alone. I'm going to propose to this girl. So I ended up proposing to her after that. Went to North Carolina as my first duty station. And before the deployment, I showed up, and then it was like 4 or 5 months later or so, we found out that we were deploying, and then we left early that next year. So when we found out we were deploying, we were like, you know what? Let's do it. So what we did was we did a small little courthouse marriage just with brothers and sisters and mom and dad and surviving grandparents that were still around. And we just did a tiny little wedding. And then the plan was when we got back to do the big wedding. So got married, deployed, came back, did the big family wedding, had everybody out. That was great, big fun time, good party and stuff. But did that. And then she ended up moving in after that. So after deployment, she ended up moving in. We left from North Carolina, went down to Georgia. Now we went down to Georgia for the second time. So my second round of schooling down there. I was there for about a year. That was my kind of like, they call it a maneuver captain's career course. So it's the career course where you learn how to, as a maneuver commander, draw up plans. They call them operational orders, and pretty much maneuver troops in battle. So how to utilize assets, how to maneuver troops in battle, how to do a whole bunch of different things. So while we were there, went through, obviously some stuff, but all said and done, about a week before we were to move to Colorado. I'm telling you, I think it was like the week. Like we were supposed to hit the road and leave on a Saturday. And the movers came and packed up the entire house on like a Tuesday. And on like the Wednesday after, so like the next day after the movers came and packed up the whole house, I found out that she had been sleeping with one of the guys that she was working with. So it was a pretty difficult thing to hear and to learn about. What happened was then I ended up pretty much moving out to Colorado and being like, okay, well, I guess take your things. I'm going to take my stuff and I'm going to Colorado and you're not going to come with me. So she ended up going back to Michigan and I went out to Colorado by myself. My parents actually flew down into Atlanta and then drove out with me, but went out to Colorado, and that's where obviously I started my new life. So I kind of think of Colorado as like my fresh start because of that, right? It's the fresh start, the new chapter of my life. I was stuck in a marriage that I wasn't necessarily happy with, right? Part of that's my fault just because I was immature and I think ignored a lot of red flags and problems that I knew about. But, obviously you can't be the victim in that, right? It's not anybody else's fault but your own, because if it's somebody else's fault, then you can't control it. If it's your fault, you can control it. So definitely was something that I messed up and I don't think I did properly. But regardless, a lot of lessons learned, a lot of valuable insight, things I know now, right? Mistakes you won't make in the future. So I moved out to Colorado. Moving out to Colorado, obviously had a broken heart, was going through a lot of rough stuff. The first few months was just like abysmal. I mean, I couldn't focus at work, couldn't keep my head on straight, couldn't keep my mind going in the right direction. Like I was all over the place. I think I moved out in like October, and all the way from October, November, December, January, really into like February, I was just completely beside myself. I mean, it was brutal. I couldn't sleep at night, couldn't eat anything. I'm not saying I was like contemplating suicide, but you have those like negative thoughts and those, oh, I can't do it or I can't go on or anything like that, right? A lot of pain. But after that, kind of coming through, what happened was I had kind of started getting myself back out there and talking to girls again. I think I was like 26 at the time, so I wasn't like super old, but started talking to girls and stuff. And I ended up meeting this girl, I think it was in February. And we started talking. This girl from Michigan, she was in the Air Force, a lot of really good, qualities and traits. She ended up knowing a friend group of mine. She was friends with some people that I was friends with and had hung out with and stuff before. So it was kind of funny because there were probably chances where we were at the same party at a time or two while we were back in college. But regardless, awesome girl, amazing girl. We ended up getting in a relationship. We ended up really hitting it off and kicking it off and just getting along really well. And it was one of those things that you notice when you feel like the universe has put everything in your path and everything is set down right. You have this different feeling. It's almost like a peaceful feeling. And I would say if I've ever loved anybody, if I've ever genuinely loved somebody, one person, if I've ever loved somebody in my life, it was this girl. So she, it was definitely, it felt like the universe had put everything where it needed to be. You were with the person you were supposed to be with. Everything was peaceful. It was calm. It was easy. It was effortless. It was a very smooth and easy relationship, and everything was right. We dated for about 6 or 7 months. It wasn't very long looking at the grand scheme of it, but I mean, it felt like forever, but it wasn't actually very long. But looking back at it, right, I know now, so you might think to yourself, like, why, if it was the perfect love of your life and everything was great, then why didn't it last? Why did it only last 6 months? Well, I'll tell you why. So I, coming out of a divorce, was not in very sound of mind, right? I told you I was going through some stuff just in my head, trying to figure things out, loss, pain, all that stuff, dealing with it. And I was not doing well. I mean, I think I remember there was a point early on in the relationship in the first month or two that I ended up saying my ex's name to her. I ended up calling her by my ex. And I was just completely flabbergasted that I had said that. And that alone, I think, is a perfect example of the fact that I was not mentally prepared to be in a relationship. I think we were the right people for each other. However, I was not the right person for her at the time. I could not be who she needed me to be in order for her to continue to improve and for me to push her and for her to have that relationship that she needed. And I was willing to change who I was, right? I stopped hanging out with my friends. I stopped doing different things. I stopped going on hikes, changing things about who I was. And I think that ate away at her, right? A girl wants a guy that's on his purpose. He's on his path. He knows what he wants. He's going to go after it. He's not going to sacrifice for anything. And she wants to be a part of that. She wants to be a part of that mission. But she can't if you don't know what your mission is. And I didn't, right? I was so lost that my whole world was completely flipped and turned upside down. And I couldn't be who I needed to be for her. She was at a different place. And I was at a different place. And I was not at a place where I could help her grow the way she was helping me grow. Now, the good part, right, and what came out of that was she definitely pulled me through that kind of like divorce. She had gone through divorce too herself. It wasn't based on the same circumstances, but she kind of understands and understood that pain. And the cool thing about it is she had a lot of, I'll say, spirituality. She was a very spiritual person in terms of she could have a very deep and honest conversation with her. And her ego wouldn't be crushed. She could say something honest to you and you knew it was coming from her heart, right? You could say something honest to her and she wouldn't get pissed off or offended or yell and scream or any of that stuff. She was so smooth and peace of mind and just a well-rounded person that she really showed me what it is that I want in a relationship. There's this thing, and I'll probably do an entire episode on this at some point, but there's something called empathetic communication, and it's the art of understanding before being understood. And what that does is by seeing that in the relationship, you understand that that person is almost putting you in front of themselves. But you can only have empathetic communication in a relationship if both people come into the relationship with their cups full. And I say this a lot too, but a relationship was when two happy people come together and they create happiness for each other. So two people come into the relationship with their cups full and in turn can give to each other to continue to improve and to make the others better, to make the other person a better version of themselves or become the best version of themselves. And if their cups both aren't full, then they can't give what they need to that other person. That other person won't receive what they need from them in order to become that best version of themselves. If their cup's not full, all the love that's coming from the other person, all that caring and all that advice and help and all that kind of stuff in the relationship is going to fill their cup. While the person with the cup half full may not be able to, while it may seem like they're giving to the other person, it's not genuine, it's not heartfelt, they're not comfortable with themselves, because you can only give that love and you can only give what you need to somebody else if you have no fear of essentially losing them or being lost without them. If you are comfortable with yourself and you're at peace with yourself and you're happy with yourself and who you are, only then is your cup full. You have no attachment, right? You're not attached to any outcome. There's no attachment of desire to any of this. You can just as happily walk away from something. And while it may hurt, right? You're like, you know what? I'm comfortable alone by myself. I don't need somebody else to be happy. And then at that point, that's when you're at the point where you can give to someone else because your cup at that point is full. So I was not there. I think hers was, and mine was not. And I couldn't give and I couldn't be that person that I needed to be for her. So she recognized that. I didn't. And it got to a point where she started to distance herself from me because I think she knew that she wanted more, right? She wanted a better version of me or of who I was. She wanted a better version of the person, but I wasn't there. And in order to get me slapped in the face pretty much and moving on the right path is we had to break up. You cannot improve by being with somebody. So we had to break up. And she started distancing herself because I think she knew that's what needed to happen. So that slowly started to eat away at me. And then I pretty much confronted her a couple times. I'm like, hey, listen, you're distancing yourself. I'm checking this out. I'm seeing this. What's going on? And she wasn't necessarily strong enough to be able to pull the trigger on the breakup. So I ended up going over one day. I think we were supposed to have dinner together. And I ended up driving over there and being like, hey, I think this is the end. And that was, I think, the hardest thing I have ever had to do because obviously I did not want to do it, but I did. And it put me again into another just painful spiral. And I think between the divorce and going through the affair and all those pains and emotions of abandonment and betrayal and all that, I think losing her, somebody that you felt like the universe had put in your life and you guys were with the right people and you're at the right times and maybe not the right times, but it felt that way, right? The universe and everything had conspired to come together to put the right people in your life. And that was the person that you were meant to be with. To turn around and walk away from that was incredibly difficult. So that was, I think I honestly felt more pain than I did going through the divorce because of those reasons. But regardless, got through that relationship. And then the Army, what I was doing at that time in the Army, I was in command, so I was super busy. I ended up having a couple field problems and we were preparing for another deployment. Prior to the deployment, because again, right, didn't take time alone to myself to heal. So I kept talking or started to try and talk to girls again to try and get my mind off it and, figure, okay, I just got to move on. I got to do this, right? I didn't heal myself properly and I wasn't comfortable being alone. So I ended up meeting another girl. And again, another amazing woman, right? Beautiful girl, beautiful, just all around, inside and out, just an amazing woman. I ended up meeting her prior to deployment, like a couple months or so before deployment. We stuck together throughout the entire deployment. We dated throughout the entire time, came back home. After about a couple months of being home, I was going through the transition of getting out of the Army and switching over to be a financial advisor with Northwestern Mutual. And during that transition phase, I had also bought my second property. When I first moved out to Colorado, I bought one and then I bought a second property. And I was going through the closing process and pretty much moving in there and all this stuff. And I realized that I continued throughout that entire relationship. I continued to think about the first one. I continued to think about that first girl. And I knew that wasn't healthy. And if I ever wanted to be in a successful relationship and if I ever wanted to be genuinely happy again, like I did in that first one, that I had to cut it off. That in order to become the best version of myself, I had to cut off the relationship I was in. Even though everything was good and there were no issues, I had to cut it off. So I started actually exhibiting similar behavior to what the first relationship, what she was doing to me at the time, I started to do to this girl. And I knew that it wasn't fair and I knew that it wasn't right. And I wanted to make things right and I wanted to be happy and I wanted to do stuff the right way. And as hard as it was, I started talking to a counselor because I really wanted to dig up all my problems and all my issues and all those things. So I started talking to a counselor and it was like, you know what? You need to be alone. You need to be alone. And you need to spend a substantial amount of time being alone. Not like months or weeks, like we're talking year or more, right? So understanding that, it's like, well, best not just sit around, I guess. So I ended up breaking it off with that relationship, which was incredibly painful because, again, she was an amazing girl. But broke it off with her so that I could start spending my time alone. And then I'm not talking like single, right? I'm not talking single, like start dating people and stuff. I'm talking alone, like with your friends and your family and coworkers alone. So I did that. And I spent about 6 months going to counseling and genuinely talking about things and getting stuff out and all that. And after about 6 months of counseling, felt to the point where I was a totally different person. I mean, some of the exercise and the homework and the thoughts and the emotions and all that kind of stuff that came up and came out during those talks, absolutely incredible. I'm telling you, absolutely incredible. And I would not be where I'm at today without making that decision of being alone and working on myself and figuring myself out and doing what I need to, because not a lot of people can do that. And I have to tell you anything about how to find happiness in a relationship and how to find peace. Being selfish in a relationship is the most selfless thing that you can do. Being selfish for yourself by me breaking up with her for my own personal gain to become the best version of me was the most selfless thing I could do, because one, I ended pain and suffering that could have gotten worse down the road. And two, I'm going to create a better relationship for whoever I meet down the road in the future to be with, as opposed to if I were to stick into that relationship. So when you understand that being selfish in a relationship is the most selfless thing that you can do, it changes everything, I think. So if I had to say anything out of that, the relationship side was huge for me. I think I've gone through some huge moments of trauma and difficulty, and I've learned a lot. And obviously not a life goal to be married and divorced, but hey, it happened and I'm grateful for it, because I wouldn't be here today talking to you guys, recording these episodes and posting this content without those things that have happened. So when I talk to clients and when we go through coaching calls and all that kind of stuff, a lot of people, obviously we talk about finance, but the biggest one, I'd say about 80% of the time, it's relationships. It's what can I do to be successful in this relationship? I feel a certain way, or I like this person, but I don't know this and that and something else and him and Han and about everything. It's like, well, listen, let's talk about it. Let's create a podcast about this and let's get some content out there, because I feel like we can help more people than just sitting one-on-one and going through it. So while I never talk about clients' names, or I'll never discuss personal information or content or anything like that we go over, what I will is bring bigger concepts to the table. And that's what we'll discuss in these podcasts, because I think it's relevant to a lot more than just one person. I think a lot of people can take away something from this. So with that being said, that's kind of like my relationship side. So I've been single now for a year, and I tell everybody, I'm like, a single Josh is a very dangerous Josh, because I have gone completely, just found my purpose and just driven with it, just taken it. I set a pretty ambitious goal when I first moved out to Colorado. We were looking for houses before we moved out, me and my ex-wife at the time. And when I found out everything that happened, I moved out here and I sat down with my realtor and I was like, you know what? I still want a house. And I want to do that, because before she was giving me a lot of grief about different houses and stuff that I wanted to buy, saying that I was buying too much and we couldn't afford it and all this stuff. And now I didn't have that. I didn't have those things to worry about. So I had free reins. So when we first moved out to Colorado, when I came out alone, once I figured out I came alone, I was like, you know what? I still want to buy a house. And I did. And what I ended up doing is I ended up furnishing the house with all of the furnishings from the marriage. So I put out the couches, all the furniture, the washers and dryers, the cooking utensils, pots, pans, plates, all that kind of stuff in the house. So the house was now furnished essentially with my entire life. And what I did was I ended up living, because it wasn't really a good idea to be alone, I ended up living with some friends up in the mountains in the town that I was in. And we paid super cheap rent, had an amazing house, gorgeous view, right on the mountains. Like we had hikes and everything right out our back door. It was a crazy place to be. But what we did was I took my house. So we lived together up in the mountains, the three of us. I took my house that I bought down in the city and I turned it into an Airbnb, because it was fully furnished. I mean, the house had everything, right? I just took in everything from my previous life and moved it in there. And then everything that I lived with the guys up in the mountains, I pretty much lived like a bachelor and just bought a whole bunch of stuff, kind of like a college kid. So I like relived college again, but I turned my house into an Airbnb. And the idea behind that was I really wanted my family and friends and stuff to have a place to stay when they came out and visit it. And then when they weren't there, I was going to start, renting it out and making money and just kind of at least letting it pay the mortgage for itself. So it was kind of cool, right? Kind of dual purpose. Well, what that did is that spurred a whole business venture essentially down the road. Before I deployed, me and a buddy drew up plans to start a business managing other Airbnbs. We had other people coming up to us, or I had other people coming up to me. I had never started a business before, so I didn't know what to do. And I was talking to a buddy. He's like, oh, I've done a few of them. Like, let's get things started. So we went into partnership, started a business together, managing Airbnb properties. I had all the brains and I knew how things worked. He knew all the knowledge about how to get like the legalities and the paperwork side of everything started. So we started the business. We got that kind of rolling, started taking on a couple clients. Well, actually, I take that back. We didn't take any clients on because he ended up getting a job offer in Arizona. So he left Colorado, moved down to Arizona, and I deployed. So everything essentially went on hold. And what I did during the deployment was I was like, hey, man, listen, so since you moved down to Arizona, what I'm going to do is I'd like to buy you out of your shares and just take this thing 100% myself. Because I know you're not going to be able to be involved, and having somebody here in person was kind of like a big part of the partnership. So since that's not the case, here's a chunk of change, and I'm going to take this thing and run with it. So when I came back from deployment, while I was going through that whole transition phase and all that stuff, that's when I started taking on clients and started growing that business. So that was one of the first businesses I started. That thing started taking off and doing really well. So that was my like kind of first big business venture. And then when I ended up breaking up, and that was during my second relationship with the second girl. And while we broke up, that business continued on. And then into COVID, so post kind of like counseling stuff. And when I kind of graduated, counseling was pretty much done just because I was, comfortable being alone at that point. And that's really what, the counseling was for. But once I really became comfortable alone, what I did was I started a couple other businesses. So I started looking at opportunities and I started looking at things differently, right? Now I'm kind of almost at that like peak version of myself. I spend time alone. I'm comfortable with who I am. I like doing what I do. I don't need anybody else in my life. I'm not relying on anybody. So now Josh has free reins to go and do whatever he wants. Why not? So I had owned a couple properties at that point, started this business. What I did the next was I started a digital media company. So this digital media company pretty much runs and manages YouTube channels, Instagram pages, and podcasts for people. So everything from outsourcing content creation to editing to production to posting to uploading to scheduling, all that kind of stuff is what this company more or less handled. So that ended up kicking off, and that was pretty cool, watching that grow. And then started taking on coaching clients and just gave it a shot, see how that goes. And I started with just a couple, and it's just kind of steadily grown from there. But that's kind of more of my fulfillment in life, right? My fulfillment more or less comes from coaching people and kind of doing these things and talking with people about, how they can improve their life and how they can grow in their own personal side of things, whether it be financial or relationships or just life coaching, how to improve, right? How to make decisions, how to do things better. So more or less started that digital media company, started doing well. And then I really ended up taking up cooking. I love cooking. I love pretty much putting on some music and just frying up the frying pan and watching the flames rise and just cooking an awesome meal and toying around with different things and experimenting on flavors and just trying stuff. So what I did was I enjoy cooking and I wanted to learn how to cook some more stuff. So I was looking around trying to find some like cooking classes that I could go to, and just be social with people or whatever, but nothing really existed. There was nothing out there. So what I did was I started a business designed around meeting local chefs and teaching classes. So this business started taking off and has grown into a national franchise, which is just incredible. So all of a sudden now looking back at where I was, 3 years ago when I was going through the divorce and pretty much living chapter 1 of my life, and now where I'm at now, I'd say in chapter 3 of my life, completely different, right? Night and day, different people. And now that you know a little bit of my backstory, you kind of understand, I think, a little bit of where I've come from, I wouldn't say struggles, but the pain, definitely, that I went through to see what I had to go through to get where I'm at, to the point where now I make decisions based on opportunities presenting themselves to me, and how much growth that has turned into. I mean, I cut out my 9 to 5. I put myself in a state of I'm an entrepreneur and I'm a millionaire and I'm going to make $1 million and I'm going to live in multiple properties, and I'm going to have all this kind of stuff, and I'm going to do all these different things to provide freedom for me and allow me to just pursue my fulfillment and to do what I want to do and not have to listen to anybody else or do what anybody else tells me or anything like that. Like, that's not what's important to me anymore. And I don't have to do that anymore. It's just incredible. It's completely changed my life. So I wouldn't be here where I'm at today. I'd probably still be working a 9 to 5. Heck, I might even still be in the Army, right? Still in the Army, waking up at 5:30 in the morning to go to PT, which is physical training, which is just working out with the guys, and just complete waste of time. I mean, when you do group workouts, like, you're only working out as hard as the slowest guy. If you're going on a group run, but you can't run faster than the slowest guy is getting the great workout, but nobody else is. Nobody else is pushing themselves. And that's, if you think about it, that was my perspective on how the Army workouts kind of went. But regardless, it turns into one of those things that you just dread, and it gets really annoying and things get old. But that's just a example of kind of the broader picture of everything. So don't necessarily get stuck on that. But that's a broader picture of everything. And I'm sure everybody can probably relate to something that's just absolutely mundane. You dread it. You hate going to it every single day. And most people, it's your job, right? So that's probably the biggest leading factor of stress in most people's lives. Either finances or relationships are the two largest factors of stress in any given person's life. So I don't have to do that anymore. I can do what I want. I make enough passive income that I can do whatever it is I want. And that's why I'm kind of creating this podcast, because I want to help other people find the fulfillment. I'm pursuing my fulfillment. And by me pursuing my fulfillment, the money has come more than I have ever imagined it ever would. And I don't have to worry about it anymore. I have that financial freedom now, so I can pursue and continue to pursue my fulfillment without hindrance. So I want to get out there, give that message to other people, and pretty much see just kind of where this thing goes. I'd love to meet some of you guys. If you guys want, post some comments. You can find me on Instagram at fulfillment_coaching, and just drop me a DM there if you want, especially if you want to talk, do some coaching or whatever. Just, mention the podcast. Hey, listen to you on the podcast. Really liked XYZ, whatever about the episode. And then we'll see if we can get you guys set up and maybe take care of you in certain ways. But yeah, if you guys have anything else, that's probably the best way to get a hold of me. Other than that, that was the first episode. Hope you guys enjoyed it. It was pretty basic, but I wanted to at least get one episode out there about myself. And I figured, you know what? Why not the first one? So that's the first one. Appreciate you guys for listening. Tune in next time. I'm going to try and post 2 times a week just to get enough content out there, get talking to you guys. Tune in for the next episode, for episode 2. And let me know kind of what you guys want to hear. If there's anything specific, especially if we're talking about relationships or anything like that, or something you guys want me to go over, be more than happy to. Look forward to talking to you guys next time. We'll see you on the Fulfillment Mindset Podcast, episode 2.